The series starts with a violent murder by a mad killer. After shooting their victim many times, the killer cruelly kicks the dead body, then removes the used bullets and covers the body with a cloth. Next, we see a young man named Jack Reacher, a former military police officer who has just arrived in the small town of Margrave, Georgia. As he walks to a local tavern, he sees a man yelling at his girlfriend. Jack is disgusted by the man's behavior, but just a stern look from Jack makes the man back down and apologize. Inside the tavern, Jack is served a hot cup of coffee and a piece of cassava bread. Just as Jack is about to eat his bread, several police cars arrive at the tavern, causing panic and confusion among the customers. Jack, who was watching everything, is surprised when the police focus on him. Although he believes he did nothing wrong, Jack peacefully lets the police arrest him on suspicion of murder. At the police station, Officer Roscoe Conklin tried to get information about Jack's identity, but he only gave his name. Searching his pockets, they found a passport, $200 in cash, and a Medal of Honor. Chief Detective Oscar Finley then questioned Jack, telling him about the murder charge and showing evidence of a body found nearby. The victim had been shot in the back of the head with a 9mm bullet at close range and had also been badly beaten. The police were having trouble identifying the victim because their fingertips were swollen. Oscar offered Jack a lawyer, but Jack refused, saying he was innocent. As Officer Conklin looked deeper into Jack's background, she found no trace of him on social media. The only information was that his parents had died and he had an older brother. Jack, known for being a former leader of a special investigation unit in the military police, had taken lives in his duty but wasn't one to kill without reason. He thought that the murder was likely done by 3 people because of the type of weapons used: 9mm bullets and subsonic silencer-equipped rounds. His guess was accurate, including his thought that the killers had done this before because of how they treated the body. Detective Finley was surprised by Jack's precise observations. Determined to maintain his stance, Detective Finley continued to suspect Jack as the murderer because his physical appearance matched the description of someone seen near the crime scene. However, Jack explained that he came to the city to find out the truth about Blind Blake, a blues singer who had died in Margrave. The police found out that the victim had died at midnight. If they could prove that Jack was still on the city bus at that time, he would be cleared of all charges. They were also looking into a phone number found on the victim's shoe and a piece of paper with the word pluribus written on it. The story then flashes back to Jack's teenage years when he and his family, including his older brother Joe, moved to a new city for their father's work. Some local teenagers did not like the newcomers, but Jack and his brother stood up to the bullies. Back in the present, Jack was locked in a holding cell, waiting for his innocence to be proven. Despite the situation, Roscoe brought him a cup of coffee, trying to comfort him. She believed Jack was innocent because, in her experience, a true criminal's behavior is easy to spot. However, there was no evidence that pointed to Jack as the murderer. Meanwhile, Oscar traced the phone number found on the victim's shoe to a house owned by Paul Hubble. When Oscar approached the house, Paul became nervous because he saw a suspicious car parked across the street. In a panic, Paul confessed to being the murderer. But during questioning, it was clear he didn't know the victim or why the crime happened. After Paul's confession, he was put in the same cell as Jack. Jack was then cleared of all charges and released from the police station. Despite Paul's confession, Oscar was still doubtful. Paul was a banker in Atlanta with a clean record and no criminal history. Even though Jack wanted to leave, Oscar asked him to stay in town. Jack's sharp thinking was useful, as he found a connection between Paul and an officer named Stevenson. Jack's guess was right when he learned Stevenson was married to Paul. Jack also figured out that Oscar was a Harvard graduate, stubborn, recently divorced but wanting to get back with his wife, and trying to quit smoking. To check Jack's suspicions, Oscar asked Stevenson about Paul's innocence. It was confirmed that Paul and his wife were at a party until 2 a.m., far from the crime scene, so Paul couldn't be the murderer. Knowing this, Oscar decided to keep both Jack and Paul in prison for a week to find the real killer. Upon arrival at the prison, the warden greeted them and told them they would be housed in a cell away from other inmates. Following prison rules, their clothes were taken, and they were given prison uniforms. However, Jack refused to take off his pants, suspecting the officer had bad intentions. He said he would not stay silent if the officer tried to force him. Both Jack and Paul were then placed in a cell with a height of 1.95 meters. The next morning, when Jack came out of his cell, he saw that he was surrounded by inmates serving life sentences. He feared trouble was coming. His fear came true when 3 inmates forcibly took Paul's shoes and glasses. The situation got worse when they tried to take Paul's pants. Jack quickly stepped in, warning the inmates to back off. When they ignored him, he had to defend himself and fought off the attackers. Later that day, while they were in the prison yard, Paul confided in Jack. He said he was a financial manager forced by his boss to join fraudulent schemes. If he refused, he would be killed. Since being in prison, Paul felt safer staying close to Jack and even followed him to the bathroom. The next day, 5 big inmates came into the bathroom intending to attack Jack. He gave them a chance to back off, counting to 3. But they attacked him, and Jack had to defend himself. Within seconds, he overpowered all 5 men, leaving some paralyzed and one with a serious eye injury. The noise from the bathroom caught the attention of prison officials, who were shocked to see Jack standing over the defeated men. Jack and Paul were supposed to be moved to a different cell, but instead, they were returned to Oscar. Oscar was still in disbelief when he learned about Jack's skills and how accurately Jack had guessed about his past relationship. Wanting to make things right, Oscar tried to contact his wife, Sharon, to invite her to reconcile. Soon after, Roscoe found out about Jack's impressive military background. Jack graduated from West Point Academy, was awarded a Silver Star, and had many honors, including the Legion of Merit Soldiers Medal. He also saved 12 of his colleagues from an explosion by himself and solved 150 cases as a military police officer. These details made Oscar rethink his assumption that Jack was the killer. Frustrated by his mistake, he took out his cigarettes from his desk drawer. Over breakfast at the prison, Jack told Oscar that a prison officer named Spivey had purposely placed them in the general population cell on orders from someone higher up. Eventually, both Jack and Paul were released. Paul's wife picked him up, and Roscoe picked up Jack. To clear Jack's name, Roscoe showed a video of him getting on a bus the night of the murders, which proved his innocence. At that time, Jack planned to leave town, but Roscoe took him out for dinner and helped him buy new clothes at a thrift store. While getting his hair cut at the barber shop, he noticed a suspicious car following him. The barber's elderly father started to tell Jack about the city of Margrave. He explained that in the past, a billionaire named Kleiner had created several elite companies in the area and funded the city's development through the Kleiner Foundation. He mentioned that the car following Jack belonged to Kleiner's son and his cousin, Dawson. Soon after, Jack approached them and asked what they wanted. Kleiner Jr. admitted he knew about Jack's case and his military background. He warned Jack that the people of Margrave wouldn't let an assassin go so easily. At police headquarters, Roscoe informed Jack about the discovery of another body with gunshot wounds from the same type of bullet. Jack was taken to see the body. As he listened to the autopsy results, he noticed something strange. The first victim was thought to have a latex allergy. The victim's hand was swollen from trying to grab the attacker's hand while using a polyvinyl shield to avoid leaving DNA. Jack also noticed that the victim had a healed broken arm from when they were 8 years old, treated in Berlin, and other details. To his shock, he realized the victim was his own brother, Joe Reacher. Overcome with grief, Jack mourned his brother's loss. Meanwhile, Oscar asked why Joe was in the city, leading to a heated argument. Jack vowed to avenge his brother's death and bring the killers to justice. Over the past week, Jack continued to uncover the truth behind his brother's murder, joined by Roscoe, who was assigned to the investigation. They went to Paul's house to gather more information. While Roscoe spoke to Paul's wife, Jack sneaked away to check Paul's shoes. In the shoe room, he found a small seed stuck to one of the shoes. With this new evidence, Jack concluded that Paul might be the killer's next target. He explained to Roscoe that while in prison, he heard inmates plotting against Paul. The presence of agrimony seeds on Paul's shoe, which were also found at the crime scene where Joe was killed, made Jack believe Paul was there when the murder happened. Long story short, when Jack and Roscoe returned to the crime scene, he started to piece together what might have happened the night of the murder. He noted the killer's skill, deducing they must have been a trained sniper due to their precise shooting in the dark. By observing the shoe tracks left at the scene, he reenacted the events. It was revealed that Joe, the murder victim, had worked in the Department of Homeland Security, dealing with issues like drug trafficking, arms trade, and border control. Although Jack wasn't familiar with the details of Joe's work, he couldn't rule out the possibility that the murder was related to Joe's job. They hadn't been in close contact for some time, so Jack knew little about Joe's professional life. Soon after, Jack rested at a hotel, with Roscoe keeping watch from a distance. His peace was interrupted by 4 thugs hired by Kleiner Jr. to attack him. Although Jack didn't want to fight, he had to defend himself when they threw bottles at him, quickly leaving the attackers paralyzed. That night, the killers of his brother, dressed in full body armor, entered a house. The next day, Jack noticed a thirsty dog and its owner, who claimed to have given the dog water. Jack was suspicious since the water container was dry and had no traces of liquid. His concerns were confirmed when Roscoe informed him of the murder of Police Chief Morrison. When they arrived at the crime scene, Jack had a bad feeling that Morrison's body was nailed to a wall, based on Paul's claims that his superiors threatened to hang him similarly if he didn't obey. As Jack and Roscoe approached Morrison's home, his prediction was true. Morrison's body was found in a terrible state. Jack quickly figured out that Morrison and several other officers were involved in bribery, and, when he didn't comply, he was killed. These criminals were not ordinary people, but had a lot of power and influence. Jack then warned Oscar and Roscoe to keep a close eye on Stevenson and Baker. The duo then went to check on Paul's family, but Paul was still missing, and his wife was very worried about his safety. Roscoe stayed to protect the family while Jack and Oscar took Paul's car to continue their investigation. In the garage, Jack noticed a bag labeled Axis Financial and took a penknife from it. As the murder case mystery deepened, it became clear that not everyone in Margrave could be trusted. The mayor, Groove, appointed himself as the chief of police, raising suspicions about his involvement in the case and the bribery scheme. The people of Margrave were divided, with some unsure about the corrupt mayor and others questioning Jack's arrival in their city. Meanwhile, a wealthy businessman named Kleiner stepped forward, declaring Jack's innocence and offering funds to help solve the case. Despite his arrogance, Kleiner's concern for the city and his personal connection to the murder, as his brother was also a victim, highlighted the urgency of finding the truth. As the investigation into the serial murders continued, Oscar asked Mayor Groove for permission to examine the pattern behind the killings. Surprisingly, the mayor seemed to think Morrison's murder was unrelated to the other cases. Oscar was tasked with looking through old files on Morrison and previously arrested notorious criminals. On the other hand, Jack had suspicions about Kleiner. He believed that people with a lot of money and power often had something to hide and thought Kleiner should be thoroughly investigated. While appearing to follow the mayor's directives on the surface, Oscar and Roscoe continued their secret investigation. To keep Paul's family safe, Oscar reached out to his friend Picard, an FBI agent in the Atlanta branch, for assistance. Oscar trusted Picard to handle the task because of their long-standing friendship. Picard had once warned Oscar against working for Margrave, which strengthened Oscar's trust in him. Mayor Groove suggested that Jack should go back to his hometown, but Jack was determined to catch the criminal at any cost. Mosley, the barber, told Jack that 2 Spaniards were looking for him after Oscar bought him a cell phone. Back at Paul's house, Jack told Charlene to quickly gather her things and move to a safe place with the protection of an FBI agent. Charlene was shocked when Jack suspected that Paul had passed away, but he believed it was true since Paul had become a target while they were in prison. Seeing a bicycle, Jack was reminded of his childhood with Joe. He remembered visiting a group of teenagers who were bullying a young boy named Billy. Jack almost fought the bullies, but Billy's parents arrived and stopped it. Back in the present, Jack noticed a suspicious car near Paul's house and quickly went inside to get Charlene. A man appeared, and Jack grabbed Roscoe's gun, aiming it at the stranger, who turned out to be Picard. After ensuring Charlene's safety, Jack continued his investigation by contacting Spivey, the prison warden, whom he believed was crucial to solving the case. Jack pretended to be Oscar, the head detective, to arrange a meeting with Spivey. However, Spivey suspected the trick and set a trap. Suddenly, Jack was ambushed by 2 armed men and forced into the trunk of a car. Jack refused to stay in the small trunk. As the men focused on his resistance, he took the chance to overpower them. Despite the difficult situation, he managed to immobilize his attackers until a police officer arrived. The officer arrested the men and took Jack to the police station, where Roscoe provided him with medical attention. Analyzing the tactics of his attackers, Jack concluded that they were either military personnel or former soldiers from South America. They spoke Spanish and used Glock 17 pistols. After treating Jack's injuries, Roscoe found out that Joe worked for the Secret Service Division. Oscar speculated that the organization was involved in counterfeiting because Paul specialized in currency management. He believed that all crimes related to drugs, weapons, and human trafficking were connected to money. Soon after, with his jacket mended and feeling rejuvenated, Jack was determined to continue his investigation by searching Spivey's house. However, Oscar forbade him from doing so and decided to handle it himself. Despite Jack's stubbornness, Roscoe was reassigned to convince him to take a break, and she invited him to relax at a cafe in Alabama. During this time, Jack and Roscoe grew closer, their newfound friendship evident. On their way back to Margrave, their car was stopped by border officials. Bracing for the worst, Jack prepared his gun. But to his surprise, the officer showed no signs of suspicion and instead informed them that they had to turn back due to heavy rains and the potential danger of flooding. As the storm raged on, Jack and Roscoe found themselves stuck in a motel, where they finally opened up to each other about their personal lives. Roscoe shared that she was raised by her father's best friend, Gray, after her parents passed away. Gray was a police officer who taught Roscoe everything she knew about the force. Unfortunately, he struggled with depression and took his own life a year earlier. He always brought her Easter flowers on her birthday as a special tradition. The next morning, when Jack accompanied Roscoe back to her house, they were shocked to find the front door open and signs of a break-in. Thankfully, no one was inside, but they discovered a cryptic message that read, "See you later." It was clear that the dangerous individuals were now targeting Roscoe, and Jack realized they needed a weapon to protect her. Roscoe was angry and irritated to learn that criminals were targeting her. She was a highly skilled cop who had worked with both the FBI and the CIA and was not intimidated. At Jack's request, she passed along a sleek weapon that had been left behind by the late Gray. At the hospital mortuary, they were greeted by the coroner, Jasper, who reported that the murder victim was Pete Jobling, a truck driver for an expedition company. The forensic investigation showed high levels of hydrogen sulfide in Pete's blood. Although Pete had no prior criminal record, only minor traffic violations and a past instance of resistance, something seemed off. They began to suspect foul play when they discovered that a renowned lawyer named Zachariah Espers was defending a truck driver in a trial. Not long after, Roscoe received a phone call from Molly Beth Gordon, an employee at the Secret Service Administration in Washington, D.C. Molly was horrified to learn that her boyfriend Joe had been killed. After his promotion to the director of the investigative division and head of the anti-counterfeiting department, she found out about Joe's covert mission. Joe had successfully taken down numerous domestic counterfeiting cases and brought many companies to justice. In recent days, Joe had targeted bigger international companies. Jack asked for Molly's help in printing out all the case files that Joe had handled. After reviewing the information with her, Jack realized that the crime always centered around money. With Paul working as the currency manager for Axis Financial in Atlanta, Jack had a hunch that this was the key to solving the case. At the same time, Jack was assigned to meet with Zachariah Perez to gather information about Jobling's case. He went to the office of the elite lawyer to request Jobling's traffic violation file. However, Zachariah refused to comply, even after Jack's persistent requests. In a tense standoff, Zachariah threatened to ruin Jack's life with a phone call, while Jack countered by threatening the lawyer's life. Eventually, Jack succeeded in obtaining the file. Meanwhile, Oscar was released from police custody with a bloodied nose and a look of annoyance after being beaten by two police officers who mistook him for a thief. When Roscoe arrived to pick up Oscar, she immediately scolded the officers for their mistake. Later, Jack, Roscoe, and Oscar met at a diner, where they learned that Pete had been contracted by Kleiner Industries, but they still couldn't understand why the company had paid for the driver's legal fees. Oscar made a shocking discovery. Spivey had been in contact with Kleiner Industries. This led him to suspect that the company might be involved in counterfeiting money and forging documents. He believed that a deeper investigation of the company was necessary to uncover the truth. On the other hand, Jack had a more radical approach. He wanted to gather evidence by breaking into the Kleiner company, even though it was illegal. Oscar strongly opposed Jack's plan, calling it barbaric. This disagreement led to a heated argument between the two men until Roscoe stepped in to mediate and calm the situation. With the situation resolved, Jack and Oscar resumed their investigation. Along the way, Jack took a moment to attend to a dog he had earlier observed being mistreated. The suspected owner later confessed that the dog actually belonged to his late uncle and that he was just taking care of it temporarily. Upon arriving at Kleiner Industrial Company, Jack and Oscar were surprised to find that there were no security cameras in sight. They observed several workers transporting a large quantity of animal feed. Suddenly, a woman approached them and led them to meet with Kleiner. As they entered the lobby, Jack noticed several stuffed animal heads displayed on the wall, making him think that the Kleiners were skilled hunters or possibly snipers. When face-to-face with Kleiner, Oscar confronted him about the phone call Spivey made to his office and asked about the death of Pete Jobling, a former truck driver for the company. Kleiner replied that Pete was just a simple truck driver and that there was no special relationship between him and the company. He explained that they hired an elite lawyer for Pete because it was their duty to provide legal protection for their employees. As for Spivey, he suspected that Spivey had connections within the company and had simply called the office number. Oscar was not satisfied with this answer. Kleiner began to boast about his sacrifices for the city and even mocked Oscar, a Harvard graduate working as a police officer in a small town. Kleiner then advised him to close the case, but this only fueled Oscar's anger. He threatened to beat anyone who tried to dictate the investigation process. At that moment, Jack watched with satisfaction as his partner took a strong stance on the case. He believed that the Kleiners were bullies who had yet to realize that they too could face consequences for their actions. Jack then remembered the day 2 Marines arrived to investigate the beating of Curtis Bishop, the teenager who had bullied Billy. Jack was actually the one responsible, but Joe had taken the blame to protect him. Concerned for their safety, Jack urged Roscoe and Oscar to leave their homes and find a safer place. He didn't want their fate to end up like Morrison's. When Roscoe arrived at Oscar's house, Jack voiced his suspicions about the excessive amount of feed being delivered to the Kleiner company, which far exceeded the number of cows they had. However, she pointed out that this was not unusual as almost everyone in Georgia owned cows. The following day, Jack and Oscar decided to stay at a motel to avoid any threats from the criminals. Meanwhile, Jack planned to search for Spivey at a place called Blue Cat or gather information about his whereabouts, as he was crucial to the investigation. While Roscoe went to a mini-market to buy supplies and food, she was confronted by Kleiner Jr. He revealed that he had been watching her and Jack's movements and shared information about Jack's past in Baghdad. He claimed that Jack had killed innocent civilians there but was protected from prosecution due to his connections with high-ranking officials. He warned her to stay away from Jack, but she was unimpressed and left him. As Jack prepared to leave a bar, he noticed a suspicious vehicle following him. To ensure his safety, he quickly returned to the bar to retrieve his gloves before speeding away in his car. He drove to a secluded area and jumped out, taking cover in the grass. 2 Spanish men stepped out of their vehicle and began searching for Jack. Jack struck first, shooting both men until they were no longer a threat. He used the gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints as he retrieved the spent cartridges and a pile of cash from one of the men's pockets. To his surprise, when he opened the trunk of the car, he discovered the fresh body of Spivey, who had died only a few hours earlier. As Jack arrived at the location where a burning car was found, Oscar contacted him and explained the situation. Jack suspected the car might belong to Joe, but without a visible license plate, it was hard to confirm. When Roscoe arrived, the 3 of them inspected the car, looking for any clues to identify it. The license plate was covered in burnt residue, making it unreadable. Using a trick from his military days, Jack applied a mixture of ketchup and acetic acid, a solution used by Marines to clean metal when they ran out of oil. This solution cleaned the license plate enough to read the number. Oscar knew they needed a more advanced system to identify the car, so he contacted Picard. Jack then told Oscar about the attack by the 2 South Americans and the discovery of Spivey's body. When Oscar asked why he killed them, Jack explained it was in self-defense. With Roscoe's help, they disposed of the bodies to avoid an investigation by the state police. Roscoe noticed the gunshot wounds on the bodies were from behind, not the front as Jack had told Oscar. Jack admitted he shot first to prevent them from retaliating. Roscoe, reminded of Kleiner Jr.'s words, pressed Jack for the truth about what happened in Baghdad. Jack revealed that he was tracking a missing person and noticed children playing football in an old hangar every day. One night, when the children didn't come home, he investigated and found 3 local men harassing the children. Unable to stay silent, he gave the men a choice: turn themselves into the police or face his punishment. As Jack and Roscoe headed to the airport, they devised a plan to dispose of the bodies in the car trunk. After sabotaging the CCTV cameras and successfully deceiving airport security, they parked the car in a remote part of the lot. During their conversation, Jack mentioned to Roscoe his suspicion that Kleiner might be using the money from his illegal activities to buy access and information. He also recalled a past encounter in Baghdad where he shot and killed 3 men who were harassing children playing soccer in an abandoned hangar. Later, Jack and Roscoe checked into a luxurious hotel room, paying for the stay with cash from one of the assassins. As an extra precaution, Jack used a toothpick to jam the door hinges in case anyone tried to track them down. Not long after, Jack received a call from Molly, who informed him that she had gathered the information he requested. To ensure they couldn't be tracked, Roscoe suggested that Molly meet them at the 5-Point station the next day by taking the train. During the conversation, Molly shared that she and Joe had been close for 2 years and that Joe held Jack in high regard, considering him intelligent, though sometimes frustrating. Jack was deep in thought over the loss of Joe, and Roscoe comforted him before they spent a romantic night together. Early the next day, Jack and Roscoe focused on searching Pete's house. Upon arriving at the address, they discovered it was the home of Pete's parents. Jack decided to be tactful in his questioning, not wanting to cause them undue stress or concern. He explained that there had been a series of hijackings at the trucking company where Pete worked, and that he was simply trying to see if he could offer any insight or information to aid in the investigation. Pete's mother seemed relieved to hear that her son was not in any serious trouble and informed Jack that Pete had been living with his wife in Brookhaven for some time. Despite the temptation to reveal his emotions, Jack chose to remain stoic, feeling that showing his feelings would be a waste of time and energy. On the other hand, Groove calls Oscar for a meeting after hearing about his confrontations with Kleiner. Groove, who has accepted bribes from Kleiner, scolds Oscar for disturbing Kleiner and insists that he must be treated with respect in the city. After giving him a stern warning, Groove tasks Oscar with investigating former convicts who might hold grudges against Morrison. Oscar must get Groove's approval for every action he takes, or he risks losing his job. Soon after, Picard contacts Oscar using a secret code and tells him to head to location 2S3B within the hour. He informs Oscar that Paul's family is safe and gives a gun to Charlene for protection. Picard promises to be gone only for a short while. Not long after, Jack and Roscoe arrived at the luxurious home of Pete, the truck driver, and were greeted by his wife, Judy. She showed no remorse for Pete's death, saying he knew the dangers of stealing air conditioners from Kleiner in Miami. The evidence of his criminal activities was clear, as Jack and Roscoe found empty air conditioner boxes in his garage. While at Pete's house, Jack received a call from Oscar asking him to go to the location specified by Picard. On the way, Jack began to suspect that Pete was involved in counterfeiting money for Kleiner. He believed that the fake bills were made in South America and sent to Florida, where Pete was responsible for collecting them and hiding them in empty boxes. However, this was just Jack's preliminary conclusion, and to confirm it, they would have to examine the files that Molly had brought with her. Arriving at the rendezvous point, Picard led the group to a secure location, cautious of any potential threats. He revealed the identity of the owner of the burnt car they had found earlier, a man named Ron Hassey, who used aliases, including the name Joe. Jack's suspicions were confirmed that the car belonged to their target. Picard then handed Jack a slip of paper with the address of a hotel where Joe had been staying, instructing him to memorize it and destroy the evidence to avoid being tracked. When they arrived at the hotel, they were delayed by 20 minutes because someone had taken Joe's bag. Jack was determined to find any leads Joe might have left behind. His persistence paid off when he discovered a piece of clothing in a nearby trash can, deliberately discarded by Joe. In the pocket of the garment, they found a cryptic note that read, "Pete's Garage and Gray's Kleiner file." However, their luck was short-lived as they were suddenly ambushed by assassins who fired shots at them relentlessly. The group split up, with the assassins focusing on Jack, knowing he held the key to Joe's message. As their car got stuck, Jack sprang into action, taking out one of the hitmen in a deadly encounter. The chase continued until he finally cornered the second assassin, engaging in a brutal fight. Just as he was about to be overpowered, Roscoe came to his rescue, shooting the assassin from behind. Though Jack was saved, Roscoe was furious and slapped him for putting himself in danger. His love and concern for her were the driving forces behind his risky actions. Oscar suspected that the leak of the hotel's location was due to Stevenson intercepting their telephone conversation with Picard. Jack discovered evidence of this when he found surveillance equipment in Spivey's car. It appeared that the enemies had been eavesdropping on their conversations using satellite dish microphones. Shortly after, Jack's mind wandered back to his childhood and the time he was falsely accused of hitting a general's son. Although it was a case of self-defense, the general held a grudge against Jack and his father, even trying to cut their salary and transfer Jack's father to Germany. Despite Jack being the true culprit, it was Joe who took the brunt of their father's anger. Returning to the present, Jack and the group were huddled in a house, trying to decode the clues left in Joe's clothes. The note they found had several initials and phone numbers, including PH, WB, and SC. Jack, who had served in the Air National Guard in Memphis, remembered that the area code JW901 was for that city. They searched Pete's garage and tried to obtain Kleiner Gray's files, but their efforts proved fruitless. The trio divided the task of making the calls listed on the paper. Jack's call was to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, while Roscoe would contact William Brandt, an economics professor at Princeton returning from a conference in Europe. Oscar was tasked with contacting the dean of the economics faculty in Columbia and a professor named Stefani Castillo, who was also attending the same conference and would be returning home in 3 days. Jack took on the responsibility of investigating the institute, knowing that corrupt agents at the federal level posed a greater threat than professors. He enlisted the help of France Neagley, a highly trusted former military colleague, to assist with the investigation. Recalling the circumstances surrounding his brother's death, Jack asked Neagley to look into the Environmental Protection Office in Memphis with the initials JW. At the airport train station, the trio went to pick up Molly, but she suddenly went missing. When they searched for the bag containing Joe's files, they discovered it had been emptied. Following the tracks, Jack found Molly on the ground, dying and covered in blood. With her death, the only clue to uncovering the complex counterfeiting scheme was lost. As Jack and his team kept investigating the murder and counterfeiting case, they saw how deep the criminal organization went. They realized that the group was not only well organized, but also very good at finding their informants. They suspected that the police in Margrave and even some federal agencies were corrupted and working with the organized crime group. While driving, Jack noticed a dog lying by the side of the road. Oscar, who knew the dog was important to the investigation, stopped the car. When they looked closer, they saw that the chain around the dog's neck was too tight. When the owner appeared, Jack got angry and punched him in the face, then decided to take the dog with him. As Jack and Oscar worked together, Roscoe couldn't help but smile at the new friendship between the two men who used to fight. After sending the dog to a safe place, Oscar drove Jack to Paul's house to get a new car because their old one had bullet holes. Jack finally found the sleek new car he was looking for. Then he took a detour to Kleiner's farm to check things out. He was still confused by the large amounts of cattle feed Kleiner had bought, much more than his cows needed. As Jack returned to his car, he noticed the same type of seeds he found in Paul's shoe, showing that Paul had been to Kleiner's ranch. As Jack strongly defended Roscoe from Kleiner Jr.'s insults, he quickly defeated Kleiner Jr. and his gang, showing great bravery. Even though he was outnumbered, Jack proved he was a strong defender and protector. Soon after, Oscar and Roscoe arrived, ready to help Jack with their guns drawn when they saw Kleiner Jr. threatening him with a knife. However, Kleiner stepped in to calm the situation, which annoyed Oscar, who didn't like taking orders from him. After the fight, Roscoe walked Jack out of the diner. Jack told her that she had become a close friend and that he cared for her a lot, just as much as Molly cared for her sister. Sadly, Roscoe soon got a call from her boss, Groove, telling her she was fired because of her involvement in the investigation with Jack and Oscar. Despite this problem, Jack avoided legal trouble from the fight with Kleiner Jr., as Kleiner did not want to risk a trial where Jack could defend himself. As Jack continued to investigate the serial murders and counterfeiting, he became more convinced that the Kleiner empire was involved. He decided to look closely at the Kleiner employee list and financial records. He also thought that Roscoe's late adoptive father might have left a clue to the case. While going through a box of weapons given to him by Gray, Jack found a hidden mini-drawer with a key inside. At the same time, Jack learned that Gray often visited Mosley's barber shop once a week. He went to the shop and found a large box left behind by Gray, which Mosley had been keeping safe. In the box, Jack found a note that gave more information about Kleiner's cattle farm. Even though the farm had only 116 cows, it was buying a huge amount of feed. This made Jack curious, as it suggested that Kleiner was trying to avoid government checks by having just enough cows to stay unnoticed. Even though Roscoe was getting frustrated with Jack's focus on this lead, she remembered her uncle, who had a similar number of cows. He thought Kleiner was lying about the number of cows he owned to avoid rules, but he still didn't understand why Kleiner needed so much extra feed. As Jack dug deeper into the case, he found some surprising information in the financial records that Gray had left. He saw that the expenses didn't match the income, showing that Kleiner had been bribing the people of Margrave for his secret operations. Even with this discovery, Jack still wondered why Kleiner had picked Margrave as his base. Further investigation led Jack to think that the city's location was perfect for a distribution center. With its old state routes and easy access to major highways, Margrave was an ideal hub for Kleiner's criminal activities. He suspected that Kleiner destroyed evidence and killed the undercover agent to stop the Coast Guard from blocking the flow of fake money into the country. This meant that the organization had many assets overseas that could be taken away. They were worried that these funds would be used to buy dangerous weapons or harm the economies of the US and Panama, two major trade hubs. Thanks to one of Gray's diaries, Roscoe finally learned that her adoptive father's death was not a suicide, as she had always believed, but a murder. The story goes back to Jack's teenage years when he and his brother Joe were with their parents and were told to apologize to the general's son. Joe apologized, but Jack refused because he believed he was right. He arrogantly said that Curtis deserved an even stronger punishment and would not say sorry. That night, Neagley called Jack with important news that she didn't want to discuss over the phone. Jack quickly traveled to Memphis and met Neagley at a quiet restaurant near his hotel. Neagley, now wealthy from her work in the private sector, was staying at a fancy hotel. While walking through the city park, Jack told Neagley about his worry that their enemy might be using a parabolic microphone to spy on him. Neagley informed Jack that the initials JW on Joe's list referred to Jimmy Dupree Willix, an investigator for the Environmental Protection Agency who was shot dead in his home. The FBI had called the case a failed robbery, but the weapon used was a small caliber 9mm pistol, and the victim's body showed signs of being beaten. Jack was surprised to find that Jimmy's case was similar to Joe's. Neagley suggested he meet with Memphis police officer O'Coins and a potential informant who might have information on Jimmy's murder. The case was linked to toxic pollution in Mississippi, and Neagley warned him to be careful because these people had powerful connections and were part of a dangerous criminal organization. Meanwhile, Roscoe asked to see a photo of Gray's body, which was previously thought to have died by falling and hitting his head on a chair. However, after looking at the photo, she suspected foul play because the wound on his head matched the pattern of a diamond-shaped object. Meanwhile, Jack and Neagley met with an informant who loved fishing in a nearby reservoir. The informant said that the water in the reservoir had become very polluted over the past year. He suspected a rich company, Clarin Chemical, was responsible. However, they later found out that Clarin Chemical had been shut down and was actually a part of Kleiner Industries. When they returned to Margrave Town, Jack and Neagley figured out that Kleiner had killed Jimmy and Joe to hide their environmental pollution. They then decided to meet with Officer O'Coin and his partner, Ribidux. Earlier, Roscoe had punched Groove after realizing that the diamond wand he always carried was the weapon used to kill Gray. Oscar, who saw the fight, quickly took her away to keep her safe. That evening, Jack, Neagley, O'Coin, and Ribidux met with an informant at a nightclub. The informant said he didn't know the federal agent's name, but that the agent was known by the nickname Viking. To protect Roscoe from Groove's anger, Oscar took her to a remote motel outside of town. She called Jack, saying she wanted to confront Groove before the case was closed. Neagley listened to the conversation and sensed Jack's growing affection for Roscoe. However, their plans were disrupted when Ribidux suddenly turned on O'Coin, killing him. Quickly, Jack and Neagley reacted by sinking their car into a nearby river to escape from Ribidux. Deciding it was best to split up, Jack went back to Margrave while Neagley stayed in Memphis to find out more about the mysterious Viking. One evening, Oscar sneaked into Kleiner's headquarters to find incriminating files. To his surprise, he found Kleiner's dead body, slumped in his office chair and covered in blood. This shocked Oscar because it showed that Kleiner was just a puppet, and the real mastermind was someone more dangerous and powerful. The next day, Oscar showed Jack a picture of Kleiner's murder. Jack recognized the wound on Kleiner's neck as the Venezuelan butterfly, a type of cut that makes the victim lose blood quickly and have trouble breathing. Oscar speculated that Kleiner was working with people from Venezuela and that their relationship must have gone bad, leading to his murder. They realized that their first assumption, that Kleiner was the mastermind, might have been wrong. They knew they had to work harder to find the real culprit. Soon after, Oscar went to the police headquarters, pretending he didn't know about Kleiner's murder. Groove assigned him to investigate the case and temporarily pause the Morrison case. As Oscar was about to leave, he was confronted by Kleiner Jr., who wanted to attack him because Oscar had accused his father of murder before. Because of this fight, Groove changed his mind and gave Oscar a few days off. Meanwhile, Jack went to a repair shop to get his car windows tinted. Since the job would take 3 days, he gave the shop owner some money to borrow his car. While waiting for Jack, Oscar shares some tomatoes with Mosley. He asks Mosley why he stays in Margrave, despite the serial killings and his willingness to die there. Instead of answering, Mosley asks why a Harvard graduate like Oscar would choose to work in a small town like Margrave, far from the center of American life. Oscar deflects the question by saying it's none of Mosley's business. At the safe house, Picard takes Roscoe to look after Charlene and the children. Before leaving, he reminds Charlene to follow safety rules, like locking both doors, turning off lights when sleeping, and not using the fireplace. From the top of a hill, Jack and Oscar watch Kleiner's factory. Jack often takes Oscar's snacks and plays with his wedding ring, even though he is divorced. Oscar reveals that he's not actually divorced. His wife died from a terminal illness. Hearing this, Jack is surprised. Oscar explains that he avoids sympathy from others and prefers people to think he is angry, stubborn, and unpleasant, leading them to believe his wife left him. Since Sharon's death, Oscar has kept one thing sacred, paying his phone bill so he can hear her voice on voicemail. Jack realizes that Oscar's reason for quitting smoking, living above a tobacco shop, and working in a remote city like Margrave is a form of penance for Sharon. Soon after, they see Kleiner's nephew climb into a box truck, suspecting he may be transferring counterfeit money, which had become harder to do because of the Coast Guard's blockade. At the shelter, Roscoe shares the story of her parents who died in a car accident when she was young. Despite being in the backseat, she survived. Looking out the window, she sees a flashlight flicker and realizes someone is watching them. She tells Charlene and her children to run into the forest if she screams for help. Meanwhile, Oscar and Jack follow the truck until they reach Tennessee. Roscoe's attempt to catch the two assassins outside the house fails when she steps on a branch. She tries to run and warn Charlene. Gunfire breaks out until Roscoe manages to shoot one of the attackers in the leg. The other attacker tries to throw a grenade, but she stops them. As the truck arrives at a motel, Oscar and Jack see a chance to check its contents while the driver and motel clerk are asleep. Their plan almost fails when Kleiner's nephew comes out to inspect the truck, but they avoid being seen. Unfortunately, the truck is empty and has no clues. Jack suddenly remembers the 2 lecturers who were supposed to arrive in the U.S. When he tries to contact one of them, William Brandt, he learns from the assistant that the professor was murdered that morning. Urgently, Jack contacts the second lecturer, Castillo, and warns him to follow his instructions to stay alive. In the morning, Roscoe helps Charlene and her 2 children through the forest to meet Picard in the town center. Because one of Charlene's children is injured, Roscoe offers to carry her. Meanwhile, Jack goes to meet Professor Castillo in a safe place. On their way, they stop at a tavern where Roscoe treats Charlene's daughter's injury by wrapping her feet with ice cube. During this time, she tells Charlene that her husband had lied about leaving Axis Financial over a year ago. To Roscoe's surprise, Charlene already knew about Paul's involvement with Kleiner. She had kept it secret to protect her family, but Paul was lured in by Kleiner's promise of a large fee for working in Venezuela to study the company's operations. Despite the risks, Paul eagerly accepted the job. Kleiner was pleased with Paul's successful currency transfers and offered him a salary 4 times his current pay and a 50% year-end bonus. However, during a visit to a horse farm that bred champions, Kleiner revealed to Paul that his work was illegal and linked to international money counterfeiting scheme. He told Paul that all the money they had transferred was counterfeit, printed by Kleiner himself. Paul had unknowingly helped Kleiner launder millions of dollars illegally. All the evidence of these transactions, including emails, IP addresses, and Paul's work, could lead to his arrest and a possible 30-year prison sentence. Trapped in a dangerous situation, Paul had to follow Kleiner's orders. That night, he was locked in the stables and saw the brutal treatment of a man who had disobeyed Kleiner, resulting in the man's beheading and castration. These horrific events showed Paul the dangers and atrocities committed by Kleiner. Later, Picard arrived to bring everyone to safety and was shocked that the enemy had found their hiding place. While in a taxi, Jack read the instructions left by Joe. He was trying to understand the cryptic words about Jobling's garage and Kleiner Gray's files. After buying a new suit, Jack felt someone was following him as he headed to the police station. Upon arriving, Jack noticed a police officer's shoes and felt confident he had found someone trustworthy. He told the officer, named Diaz, that he was a lawyer and asked to meet his client, Stephanie Castillo, who was in protective custody due to threats. Jack was finally allowed to see Castillo, who had worked with Joe in recent years. They were experts in international and domestic monetary policy and were the only academics in the U.S. with specialized knowledge in detecting large-scale money counterfeiting. Joe needed their expertise to solve this mystery. This organized crime ring was very dangerous. About 80% of U.S. $100 bills circulate in the underground economy, used for illegal activities like drug trafficking, weapon sales, and human trafficking. Criminals prefer U.S. currency because of its stability and use as a reserve against other currencies. This leads many U.S. criminal organizations to counterfeit dollar bills using various methods, including exploiting low-security holograms and specific dyes. In response to this issue, Joe created a plan to make counterfeiting money impossible for criminals. He aimed to control a special type of paper that could only be obtained with a government permit. Only one company was legally allowed to produce this special paper for U.S. dollar bills, but Joe found another company in Georgia determined to produce it illegally. Jack realized that the Kleiner industry was not shipping counterfeit bills to Venezuela, but was actually producing them there. Before leaving, Jack told Castillo to stay at the police station until he returned. He promised to find the person responsible for the crime and make them pay. As he left the room, Jack asked Diaz about his military background. Jack noticed from Diaz's laced boots and hemmed pants that he was a former military man. Diaz admitted he was an Army first lieutenant. Jack then revealed that he was a retired Marine major from Special Investigations 110. He confessed he was not a lawyer but wanted to do what was right. With several police officers, federal agents, and even Jack's own brother, who worked in the Secret Service, having fallen victim to the crime, Jack asks Sergeant Diaz to protect Professor Castillo, as they are also in danger. Diaz, being a soldier, eagerly agrees to take on the task. As Jack leaves the police station, he realizes someone is following him and quickly darts into a deserted alley. Jack overpowers the person, and during the violent struggle, he gets slashed in the stomach with a knife. Despite this, Jack prevails and kills his attacker. That night, Stevenson and his wife talk about the recent serial murders. The situation makes her fearful, and she asks him to leave the city since some of the victims were people they knew, including superiors and relatives. However, they don't know that 4 dangerous and maniacal killers, dressed in full protective gear, are on their way to their home to kill them both. The scene shifts to Atlanta Airport, Georgia, where Jack reminisces about when his father was transferred to Germany. Despite their initial reluctance, Jack and his brother had to move to a country they found dull. The Germans were known for being individualistic and unsocial, but the brothers were fortunate to have loving and wise mothers. Joe was known for his exceptional problem-solving abilities, while Jack was 3 times as strong as others his age. Soon after, Oscar arrives to pick up Jack. Jack immediately informs him about the information he received from Castillo, including the attempted murder carried out by Venezuelans. As the chief detective, Oscar showed respect by attending Kleiner's funeral, even though Kleiner was connected to a notorious mafia group. However, the funeral took a dramatic turn when Kleiner's son, Dawson, boldly accused Oscar of killing his uncle. Oscar warned him that if he continued making such false accusations, there would soon be 2 Kleiners in the grave. On their way to the repair shop to get his car, Jack noticed a worker trying to hide an oil spill with cat litter. Just as they reached the shop, Oscar received the terrible news of the deaths of Stevenson and his wife, a tragedy similar to Morrison's death. Jack believed that the psychopaths were punishing Stevenson for his past mistakes by torturing him and making him watch his wife being tortured. This theory was supported by the presence of mirrors at the murder scene. Jack thought that after Dawson discovered the hole in the delivery truck, he started targeting people close to Oscar for information. With this in mind, Jack arranged to have lunch with the last remaining police officer in Margrave, Baker. Despite the news of his partner's death, Baker was seen enjoying his meal ravenously. Jack used this chance to frame Baker, whom he suspected was involved with the killers. He pretended to trust Baker more than the other officers and even acted unaware of the real killer, accusing Oscar of being the serial killer. Jack, who had been pretending to be Oscar's friend to find his brother's killer, revealed his plan to visit Paul's house that night to look for evidence and lead. He promised to give any findings to Baker, who seemed to believe all of Jack's lies. After the meeting, Jack bought military gear, including clothing, Rambo knives, and special powder. When he arrived at Paul's house, he prepared for the attack he expected from Dawson and his men. Despite the stormy weather, his prediction was correct, and the group arrived to kill him. Jack acted quickly, eliminating the driver to prevent any escape. Using a Rambo knife, Jack took down another attacker. He then struck the third suspect from behind, leaving only Dawson and one of his men to face off against him. They fought fiercely until Jack was thrown into a nearby pool. Despite nearly drowning, he regained consciousness, retrieved his weapon, and ultimately killed Dawson. After getting the answers he needed, Jack contacted Roscoe to share the information Castillo had given him. It turned out that Joe hadn't discovered the counterfeit paper money scheme. The criminals were wiping the ink off real dollar bills and reprinting them with higher denominations. Meanwhile, Paul was responsible for providing Kleiner with a supply of $1 bills, which he got from the casino and parking attendants. These stacks of $1 bills were transported to Margrave in a feed delivery truck, leaving behind chemical waste that polluted the Mississippi River. The Environmental Protection Agency was silenced as they tried to expose the pollution case. Behind the guise of cattle ranching was a much more sinister operation: counterfeiting. The animal feed was transformed into a powerful cleaning agent to erase the ink from $1 bills and then print them as $100 bills. The counterfeit bills looked real because they used the pre-1990s version of the currency. After the process, the truck carrying the fake money was sent to Florida to be discreetly distributed to Venezuela. Their next mission was to gather enough evidence to implicate Kleiner Industries in the counterfeiting operation. Soon after, Roscoe informs Picard that Jack has made a breakthrough in the case. Jack then contacts Oscar, directing him to Pete Jobling's house. However, he spots 3 suspicious individuals who seem to be targeting him. Jack quickly instructs Oscar to arm himself and informs him of the Jasmine hotel room he is occupying. Jack realizes that the dividing wall of his room is made of flimsy plywood panels. He tells Oscar to turn the TV to full volume and use the distraction to break through the wall and escape to the next room. Thanks to Jack's quick thinking, Oscar successfully avoids the assassination attempt. Early in the morning, Jack and Oscar head to Pete's house, only to find it burned down in an obvious attempt to destroy evidence. Jack then tells Oscar that he had killed Dawson and 4 others. As he rereads Joe's letter, he realizes that Jobling referred to Pete Jobling's parents, also known as Jobling Sr. During their search of the garage, Jack finds a box with Kleiner's markings containing millions of dollars in counterfeit bills. He instructs Oscar to contact Picard and meet them at Kleiner's ranch house. This discovery would be enough to bring down both the Kleiner Foundation and Groove. Jack plans to take the money to Bentley himself. As they headed to the ranch house, Jack received crucial information from Neagley about the shooting death of an environmental protection agent. The case was being handled by an FBI agent named Nitmo, who claimed it was an armed robbery. Neagley discovered that Nitmo had an unusual amount of wealth and found out that he had actually died 3 years ago from cancer. However, his former partner, who was still active in the FBI, was Picard. It turned out that Picard was part of the same criminal organization as Kleiner Jr. and Groove. In the end, the truth came out. The masterminds behind the huge international counterfeiting scheme were Kleiner Jr., Groove, and Picard, who had betrayed their roles as federal law enforcement officials for wealth. Kleiner Jr., also known as KJ, then showed a video of Roscoe, Charlene, and her children being held hostage. Jack was given an ultimatum: bring Paul to the criminals, or Roscoe would suffer the same fate as Morrison. The criminals needed Paul because the counterfeit money they had made was stuck due to a Coast Guard blockade, and their Venezuelan client was waiting for the money they had already paid for. The twist was that KJ himself had murdered Kleiner. To protect the illegal business, he killed his own father, thinking he was too weak to safeguard the operation. It was also KJ who organized the killing of Memphis environmental protection agents, Pete Jobling and Molly, on the subway. He also killed Joe, much to Jack's anger. Despite trying to control his emotions, Jack was forced to watch as KJ, the killer of Joe and Dawson, continued to kick and beat Joe's lifeless body. The situation escalated when Kleiner found out about KJ and Dawson's brutal murder of Police Chief Morrison. Kleiner lost control and thought about sending KJ to a mental hospital, but he refused, just like he did as a child. Making matters worse, Groove planned to frame the Jack brothers as the masterminds behind the killings. He even created fake evidence to suggest Joe was involved in illegal drug and weapons trades, and that Jack bribed the local police. Jack had only 24 hours, with Picard by his side, to find Paul or face the consequences of Roscoe, Charlene, and their children being killed. Jack and Picard set out to find Paul. Their first stop was Jack's regular coffee shop, where he ordered his usual black coffee and peach pie. While they ate, he analyzed a map, trying to pinpoint possible hideouts for Paul. He narrowed it down to the Augusta territory, suspecting Paul would want to stay close to his family. Although Jack was confident in his theory, Picard was more cautious and refused to take it for granted. Jack felt that Picard might be planning to kill him at the right moment. The tension between them increased when, as the waiter served their drinks, Jack's arm brushed against the cup, causing hot coffee to spill onto Picard's pants. With urgency, Jack grabbed a cake fork and punctured the tire of their car. Despite this setback, they continued towards Augusta based on Jack's calculations. Meanwhile, Oscar was viciously beaten by Baker, one of KJ's men. As they drove through the night, a warning light on the dashboard indicated a problem with the tire. Jack pulled over and, while changing the tire, Picard kept a close eye on him. In a moment of quick thinking, Jack seized the opportunity to engage Picard in a fight. In the end, Picard was shot, but his body mysteriously disappeared into the nearby bushes. Undeterred, Jack used Google Maps to guide him to a motel within 5 kilometers of the Augusta bus terminal. Eventually, Jack succeeded in finding Paul's hiding place. Meanwhile, at Kleiner Industries, the Mafia continued counterfeiting US dollars. Groove moved Charlene's children to a secure room to carry out their evil plan without interruption. Jack was able to locate Paul easily because he knew Paul wouldn't use his credit card for travel. With limited cash, Paul had to take the bus and stay at a Jasmine hotel under the alias Harrison. When Jack arrived at Paul's house, he found it in disarray, the result of the battles that had taken place there. Jack's mission was to retrieve the truck that Dawson had used to attack him. At the police station, Baker got a shocking message on Oscar's phone. "Lay down and take cover." The message was from Jack, who was planning to break into the detention center to save Oscar. Sadly, Baker was hit by a truck as Jack carried out his plan. Despite this, Jack freed Oscar and got the weapons they needed. The final fight with the criminals was coming soon, and Neagley joined them to help. That night, Jack, Oscar, Paul, and Neagley met at Mosley's house to make a plan to break into Kleiner Industries. They studied the maps and found out where Roscoe and Charlene were being held hostage. Meanwhile, Roscoe's plan had Paul's children separated and Charlene forced to follow orders. That night, they moved into action, heading straight for their target. Neagley set up with his sniper rifle to take out guards from a distance. Jack brought a gallon of gasoline to create a distraction for the guards. Paul was ready with his weapons to help save Roscoe and his family. When Neagley fired the first shot, Jack quickly took out a suspicious guard. Oscar lit a cigarette, preparing for the possibility of dying that night. The gasoline was ignited, causing a big explosion that surprised Kleiner Jr. and the Mafia members. A fierce shootout began when the two groups met. With Neagley covering them from above, Jack and Oscar fought the enemies up close, taking them down one by one. Paul took the chance to save his children and lead them to safety. The battle between Oscar and the criminals was intense. Once the area was safe, Jack freed Roscoe and Charlene by cutting their handcuffs. Neagley, facing strong enemies, stood firm and protected the team. Charlene ran to her husband and children as soon as she was free. The fight between Oscar and Picard, who had somehow survived, started again. Roscoe also wanted revenge on Groove, who she found out was responsible for her adoptive father's death. In the end, Oscar won by killing Picard, and Roscoe got her revenge. With everyone else safely out of the factory, only Jack and his enemy, Kleiner Jr., were left. Jack distracted Kleiner Jr. by dropping some bait, which Kleiner Jr. fell for and attacked him from behind. After a tough fight, Jack defeated Kleiner Jr., ending the mastermind behind his brother's murder and many others. Suddenly, there was a big explosion in the factory, but Jack escaped just in time and was hugged tightly by a grateful Roscoe. After a romantic night, Jack lay next to Roscoe, thinking about the past. He remembered being called back to Germany by his brother Joe because their mother was very sick. Joe had asked him to be strong and not cry in front of her. Even though they had the chance to get medical help in the US, their mother refused, saying that seeing her two sons grow into good men was enough for her. During this time, Jack's mother told him that she knew Jack had hit Curtis when they were teenagers, but Joe had taken the blame to protect him. In her final moments, she gave Jack a war medal left by his grandfather, symbolizing bravery and doing what was right. These were his last memories of his mother and the first time he had ever cried. In the center of Margrave, Jack and Roscoe have a final, emotional talk as he gets ready to disappear. The Central Police and the FBI are coming to town, looking for him. Even with an uncertain future, he decides to leave, walking away from the familiar comforts of home. Roscoe makes her own choice. She agrees to Jack's suggestion to run for mayor, wanting to make a difference in her community and honor their love. As they kiss goodbye, their love and commitment to each other are clear. Meanwhile, Oscar makes a big decision. He adopts a dog that Jack rescued, naming the dog after his friend. At the local tavern, they make peace and agree to go their separate ways. Oscar returns to Boston, ready to start a new chapter in his life as his late wife would have wanted. As Jack continues his journey, he takes a moment to remember the past. He buries the medal he got from his late mother near the place where Joe and he were found. With a heavy heart, Jack sets out again, determined to continue his journey. The second season starts with a helicopter flying over a mountain and dropping a man into a forest, where he dies. Then, we meet a guy named Jack Reacher. 3 years ago, Jack stopped investigating the death of his younger brother, Joe, and decided to live a normal life. Back then, Jack was in the military, but now he lives like everyone else. One day, Jack went to a thrift store to buy clothes, but he didn't have enough money. So, he went to the nearest ATM to get some cash. While waiting in line, he saw a woman who looked scared while taking out money. He thought she might be in trouble. After looking around, he saw a suspicious car nearby. When he asked the woman about it, she said she was being threatened. Jack quickly went to the car and confronted the armed man inside, who was holding the woman's son hostage for ransom. Jack overpowered the man and saved the boy. After handling the situation, Jack took out his money but saw a strange number on the receipt. He didn't think much of it and went to the thrift store to buy clothes. Meanwhile, his friend Francis negligently called and urged him to come to New York to talk about the death of their former military colleague, Calvin Franz, who had been murdered. In the past, Jack was an important person in the U.S. Army, leading a team called the 110th Special Investigations Unit. His team included Francis, Tony, Jorge, Manuel, Stanley, David, and Carla, who handled the money stuff, along with Calvin. Now, in the present, Jack is in New York meeting with Francis at a restaurant. They're talking about Calvin, who was found dead in the mountains. Francis learned from Calvin's wife that he hadn't come home for nearly a week before 2 students found his body. When Jack looked at the photos of Calvin in the report, he thought Calvin had been tortured before being thrown out of a helicopter. Jack and Francis couldn't figure out why Calvin was murdered, so they decided to start investigating. Francis also mentioned another former team member who couldn't be reached. After their meeting, Jack and Francis went to Calvin's wife's house. As they walked to Francis's car, Jack felt like someone was watching him from one of the nearby cars. Gaetano Russo and KJ were in separate cars, following Jack. At the same time, Shane called someone to report Jack's location. On their way to Calvin's house, Jack and Francis contacted David to meet them later. When they reached Calvin's place, they asked his wife Angela about what happened before his death. Angela said that Calvin used to work with the CEO of a big company but quit after his son was born. Angela gave them the key to Calvin's office so they could look for more clues, as the police had already been there. After getting the key, Jack and Francis said goodbye and left. As they were leaving, Jack noticed the same black car from earlier near the restaurant. He told Francis that he thought someone was following them, but she didn't think much of it. Meanwhile, KJ found out where Jack and Francis were staying in New York. His boss, Shane Langston, told him to keep watching them at the hotel. When Jack and Francis returned to Calvin's office, they saw it was a mess from a search, but nothing was found. Francis realized the key Angela gave her was for a public locker at the post office. She thought Calvin might have hidden something important there. They hurried to the post office, but it was closed. So, they decided to come back the next day. Meanwhile, a guy named Adrian, nicknamed AM, arrives at the Los Angeles airport. He goes to the bathroom to burn his passport. He meets 2 men in a secret spot to get a new passport with a different identity. Since AM doesn't want anyone to know who he is, he kills the 2 men. The next day, Francis and Jack return to the post office. They trick the officers and open Calvin's locker. Inside, they find files and a hard drive. When they return to their hotel and check Calvin's files, they find Francis' room is a mess, just like Calvin's office. They suspect the same person is behind both incidents. They get ready to search the room and catch David, who says Francis' room was already messy when he arrived. Francis opens Calvin's hard drive, but it needs a password. They guess the password might be Jack, since Calvin admired him. It works. They find lists of names with the initials AM and some random numbers that are hard to understand. David suggests they ask Tony for help decoding them. When they get to Tony's place, they find his dog dead. They think Tony must have been killed too, because he wouldn't leave his pet behind. Jack becomes more convinced that someone is trying to track down members of their old unit, the 110th Special Investigations Unit. After leaving Tony's place, Jack spots the same car he thought was following them. He knocks out the owner, suspecting he is a stalker. They learn the man is Russo, a New York police officer investigating Calvin's death. Realizing they are being hunted by the police, they decide to leave the hotel and find a new car to avoid being tracked. Back at the hotel, Jack ran into Carla, who had just finished a mission in Texas. He used her fake ID to rent a new car so they could keep looking for Calvin's killer without getting caught by the police. Later, Carla joined them to help understand the confusing data on Calvin's hard drive. Jack guessed that someone with the initials AM was targeting former members of their unit, the 110th Special Investigations Unit. Meanwhile, KJ was following them as they headed to Atlantic City, New Jersey. KJ contacted Shane, who ordered him to kill Jack and his friends. In Atlantic City, they found Jorge's office in a mess and only a photo of him with a woman named Milena. They went to a bar to find her, but the bartenders tried to stop them. Jack and Francis fought them off while Milena tried to escape, but Carla and David caught her outside. Jack and the group talked to Milena to find out about Jorge. She mentioned that KJ, a man with a scar, had visited her recently asking about a device Jorge had given her. Milena explained that Jorge, along with Calvin and Manuel, had visited the bar a week ago. However, Jorge hadn't returned since receiving a call mentioning the numbers $650 and $100. Jack's friends didn't understand the significance of these numbers, but Jack seemed to be getting an idea. Soon after, Jack and his friends went to a casino where Jorge and Manuel worked. They suspected their colleagues might be involved in investigating a gambling fraud case worth $65 million. They talked to the casino director, Wright, to ask about any fraud cases in gambling. Wright denied any wrongdoing, stating that the casino's records were accurate. But he agreed to help Jack and his friends uncover the true intentions of Jorge and Manuel, as well as the person Jack suspected, known as AM. Wright even offered them a place to stay for the night. When Jack and Carla couldn't sleep, they decided to go back to the casino to play some games. They noticed KJ, who seemed suspicious, so they quickly left. They had to face some men who had been following them. Using their special forces martial arts skills, Jack and Carla defeated the men and found one of their phones. They used it to contact Shane, the boss of the stalkers. Shane realized his men had failed and started to panic. After the call, Jack and Carla searched the stalker's car and found a parking ticket from a company in New York. During the fight, Jack got hurt, so Carla, who had feelings for him, happily helped treat his wound. The next morning, AM met someone who said 650 guns would be delivered by a truck with GPS. Meanwhile, Jack and his friends met Wright before heading out to investigate using the parking ticket they found. Wright mentioned that someone with the initials AM wasn't staying at any hotel in the city. They also learned that Jorge and Manuel were found dead in New York. The investigation revealed they weren't involved in the gambling fraud case. Carla believed their deaths were connected to the New York case. Previously, Calvin was tortured by Shane and his men for information, but he didn't give in, even when Shane threatened his former colleagues from the 110th Special Investigations Unit. Angry, Shane ordered Calvin to be taken to a helicopter and dropped in the mountains. Before he was let go, Calvin warned Shane that Jack would seek revenge. Now, Jack buys weapons and cell phones for his team before they head to New York. On the way, Russo tries to catch them, so Carla stops the car. Because of a previous fight, Jack is taken to the police station with David posing as his lawyer. Meanwhile, Carla and Francis meet Marlo Burns, the director of operations at New Age, to get help tracking down the parking card used by Jack's stalkers. After checking, Marlo said the parking card belonged to a man named Trevor Seropian, who managed an office maintenance company. Without delay, Marlo gave Trevor's home address to Carla and Francis so they could talk to him directly. Meanwhile, Jack was being questioned. Russo admitted he felt uneasy about Jack and the other members of the 110th Special Investigations Unit looking into Calvin's death, as Russo was assigned to lead the case. However, Russo eventually agreed to work with Jack to solve the case, especially since the deaths of Jorge and Manuel were believed to be connected to Calvin's death. Russo showed Jack a file about terrorism that mentioned someone with the initials AM, named Azari Mahmoud. He is known as a weapons broker for terrorist groups. Jack suspects that Azari might be the person thereafter. However, he isn't completely certain that AM stands for Azari Mahmoud because he found several lists of names with the same initials in Calvin's files. Because of this, Jack asked Russo to find out the real name behind the initials AM. Russo mentioned that he received a report saying a man named Alexander Markopoulos had just bought a flight ticket to New York, and the flight was leaving in an hour. Russo planned to arrest him. Unfortunately, AM, who was at the airport, realized the police had discovered his identity as Alexander. He contacted Shane and told him his cover was starting to be blown, so he needed to find another way to get into New York without being identified. Meanwhile, Carla and Francis, back at the hotel, discussed some random numbers they found in Calvin's file. They suspected these numbers might represent the number of working days in the last 7 months, which could indicate a shipment of goods sent by someone. Later, Jack and the others went to Trevor's address. They got into a shootout with the people there. One of the residents, named Collins, managed to escape. Jack chased after him, but Collins died of a heart attack before Jack could get any information from him. Fortunately, Jack found out that Collins worked at the New Age office. Because of Jack's impulsive actions, Russo warned them not to interfere with the police investigation into Calvin's case. Jack explained they were misled into going to the house by Marlowe from New Age, and he suspected New Age might be sending hitmen to eliminate them. Russo admitted they failed to catch Alexander, who wouldn't use the initials AM for his mission. Jack discovered that Collins worked at New Age, so Russo planned to search their office using this information. Russo reminded Jack not to act without his approval. Despite the warning, Jack and his team went to the New Age office at night and quickly grabbed important files to avoid police detection. While going through the files, they were shocked to find a photo of Tony with Shane and other New Age employees who had attacked members of their unit. The next morning, at the New York police station, Russo got in trouble with his bosses because the police didn't move fast enough to search the office. Someone else had already ransacked it. Russo's boss, Drew Marsh, was sure it was Jack who did it, so he asked Russo to investigate. But Russo didn't think Jack was the culprit because he had warned him earlier. Meanwhile, Jack and his friends were at a restaurant discussing Tony joining New Age. Jack believed Tony couldn't be involved in any crimes New Age might have committed. But Francis thought differently. She suspected Tony might have disappeared after their colleague from the 110th Special Investigations Unit died, and even let his dog die to avoid suspicion from Jack and the others. David then showed some lists of New Age employees, led by Shane, and suggested that Shane ordered people to attack their unit and involve Tony in it. Besides that, Marlowe is also revealed to be a New Age employee, making David even more suspicious that many New Age employees might be involved. Shortly after, Francis checked the employees' emails and found some that were only between Tony and Marlowe, mentioning the Little Wing album. Suddenly, Jack remembered New Age's biggest federal defense project, called Little Wing, which was a trial project for military technology. Unfortunately, they couldn't find much more information about the project, except that Senator Lavoie, who's known for being corrupt, supports it. So, David plans to gather more details about the senator, including his legislative director. In the past, the 110th Special Investigations Unit seized a lot of valuable heroin. When Jack did a recount, he realized a package of heroin was missing. So, he and the others checked Tony's car, which had been used to transport the heroin. During the inspection, Tony claimed to have found a package of heroin in his car, saying it might have slipped during the journey. Now, Francis and Carla, recalling the incident, suspect Tony was trying to hide the heroin to sell it again for a high price. However, Tony's plan failed when Jack rechecked his car, forcing Tony to hand over the heroin without raising suspicion. Francis and Carla think Tony might also be interested in the Little Wing project, which could earn him a lot of money. However, Jack still has doubts about Tony's involvement. Meanwhile, in Denver, AM, using a different name, meets with a cosmetic surgeon named Manuel L. Zogby to discuss facial surgery to help with his mission. Suddenly, AM kills the doctor and takes on his identity. On the other hand, David gathers information about Daniel Boyd, Lavoie's legislative director, who has been involved in criminal cases before. With this info, Jack and his team plan to capture Daniel by tricking him into revealing details about the Little Wing project. At the same time, Russo contacts Jack and scolds him for searching without permission. Jack fires back, blaming Russo for being slow in handling his colleague's death. He also promises to send Russo lists of New Age security teams to investigate. Soon after, Jack's team heads to Washington, D.C. to deal with Daniel. Before they leave, Francis and Carla visit Marlowe's house, but she's not there. They notice the rooms are still messy, as if Marlowe left in a hurry. Later, Jack and his friends attend a fundraising event in Washington where Daniel is expected to be. Francis keeps watch from a distance, while Carla tries to get Daniel's attention. Meanwhile, Jack and David keep an eye on their surroundings and try to crack the code hidden in the random numbers. Jack tries adding them up using different theories until he notices the number 650 stands out as the difference between two rows of numbers. However, they still haven't figured out what the 650 code means. When Carla went out with Daniel and brought him to her car, she started seducing him by offering him heroin. Just as Daniel began using the illegal drugs, a policeman named Finley, who was an old friend of Jack, showed up and pretended to arrest Daniel. At the police station, Jack posed as an FBI agent and prepared to interrogate Daniel. Meanwhile, David, acting as the legal expert, tried to pressure Daniel into revealing information about Little Wing. After much insistence, Daniel finally explained that Little Wing was a software technology code designed to protect commercial aircraft from missiles. There, Daniel revealed that Lavoie, knowing the technology's military potential, passed a law to facilitate its development. According to Daniel, New Age, the company behind Little Wing, has two headquarters in New York focusing on software, while all the hardware is manufactured in Denver. With the information from Daniel, Jack and David decide to visit the Department of Internal Affairs, where Jack's late brother used to work, to gather more details about AM before heading to Denver. Meanwhile, Francis and Carla are tasked with visiting a hardware production site in Denver to ensure the safety of the missiles made with Little Wing technology. While on their way to Denver, the four of them stop at a restaurant for dinner but are suddenly surrounded by a group of motorcycle gangs who try to attack them. They quickly fight back against the motorcycle gang and defeat them. Jack then takes the cell phone from one of the gang members to contact Shane, who sent the gang after them. During the conversation, Jack threatens to kill Shane just like Shane killed Calvin. The next morning, Jack was at David's house, urging his family to move to a safer place. David reminded his wife not to use social media, as it could be tracked by enemies. Their plan was to find Calvin's killer and investigate the Little Wing issue. Meanwhile, Carla and Francis were at the New Age Denver office disguised as government officials. They met with the factory leaders to inquire about the Little Wing problem. To their surprise, they learned that all the missiles had been shipped out just 10 minutes earlier, as shown by the shipping documents. At the same time, the delivery truck carrying the missiles was stopped by several men working for AM. They easily took control of the truck after killing the driver. Meanwhile, AM contacted Shane to tell him about their success in taking over the truck. AM reminded Shane to keep his promise, and Shane agreed, promising to help AM by ordering his men to stop Jack's colleagues from interfering with Shane's business. At the spot where the truck was hijacked, Carla and Francis arrived, but AM's men immediately opened fire on them, knowing they were there to stop the missile delivery. Despite being attacked, Carla and Francis managed to fight back and subdue the attackers. Unfortunately, the leader of the hijacking escaped with the truck carrying the Little Wing missile. Meanwhile, Jack and David couldn't uncover the true identity of AM, but two officers admitted they were struggling with the case. Nevertheless, they were determined to catch AM as soon as possible. Jack remarked that if he caught AM first, he would likely seek revenge for the deaths of his friends. After leaving the Department of Internal Affairs office, Jack and David got word from Francis that criminals had stolen the truck carrying the Little Wing missile. Francis explained that she and Carla went into the forest near the hijacking site to avoid being caught by the police. During their investigation, Francis mentioned that Tony was believed to be alive because his signature was on the missile delivery document. However, Jack found it hard to believe because he still trusted Tony, despite his colleagues suspecting Tony's involvement in the Little Wing project crime. Shortly after, Jack was approached by two messengers sent by Senator Lavoie. They took him to meet the senator in Washington, D.C. The senator asked Jack to help stop the Little Wing project. Lavoie explained that he had changed his mind about the project because it could be dangerous for both the military and civilians if it fell into the wrong hands, like terrorists. Lavoie believed Jack could help because of his success in uncovering criminal plots before, including the conspiracy that caused his younger brother's death. He asked Jack to join forces to stop the criminals from getting the Little Wing technology. During their talk, David called Jack, telling him about Calvin's funeral the next day and urging him to return to New York right away. The next day, at Calvin's funeral, Francis and Carla told Jack and David about a truck hijacking involving missiles. They didn't know where the missiles were taken, but guessed that the hijackers would hide them well. Jack thought that the people responsible for Calvin's murder and the hijacking would be present during the missile transaction. Soon after, Jack met Russo, suspecting he might have informed the motorcycle gang that attacked them earlier. Russo denied it, saying he was busy investigating New Age files. He suspected Tony was behind the Little Wing project, but Jack still trusted Tony. During the funeral, 2 snipers attacked, and Jack and the others fought back, managing to take down one of the snipers. As they saw the other sniper trying to escape in a car, Jack and Russo chased him. They trapped him, and Jack interrogated him about the attack. The sniper confessed that he was hired by someone named Swan, who promised to pay him later that night. As night fell, Jack and Francis, along with the sniper, convinced him to lead them to where Swan would pay him. They went into an abandoned building where the payment was supposed to happen. However, as soon as the sniper entered, there was an explosion, and he was killed. In the park, David started to think more and more that Tony was behind the Little Wing project after hearing something. But Jack wasn't sure if Tony was really involved or working with New Age. Soon after, Russo arrived and told them about a report on the explosion that killed the sniper. The investigators found parts of a bomb, suggesting it was a professional job. Russo also said they got a tip about where Marlowe's car was, in northern Manhattan. When they got to where Marlowe's car was supposed to be, it was empty. So, they went to a nearby store to check the security cameras to see if they could find out where Marlowe went. In the store video, they saw Marlowe buying things quickly while her daughter Jenny played Nintendo. They all went back to Marlowe's house to find out Jenny's game's IP address. It took Francis a while to do it, so Jack decided to take a break. Meanwhile, AM had just parked his car when a policewoman came up to him and asked for his ID and license. But when she realized AM's ID was fake, he panicked and stabbed her to avoid getting caught. Meanwhile, Russo went to Drew's house, feeling upset because he discovered that Drew had betrayed him. Drew had shared Jack's location with New Age, causing Jack and his friends to deal with motorcycle gangs. Drew argued that he did it to stay safe, especially since Shane offered him a lot of money for the information. He also suggested that Russo should consider Shane's offer if the New Age leader approached him, because Shane was known for being ruthless to his enemies. As for Francis, she kept trying and finally found Jenny and Marlowe hiding at Marlowe's friend's house. To catch Marlowe, Jack made Marlowe's friend leave the house and held him there until Marlowe came looking for him. The plan worked, and now Jack and the others could question Marlowe about her involvement in the Little Wing project. Marlowe confessed that she was only following Shane's orders to give Trevor's address because Shane was afraid the Special Investigations Unit would come to the New Age office. In her confession, Marlowe explained that Tony wasn't involved in the Little Wing project. In fact, Tony wanted to stop Shane's actions because he thought the Little Wing chip added to the software was causing research failures. But the management decided not to reevaluate things to meet the contract's terms. So, the engineers at Little Wing manipulated the test reports to hide the failures. Tony told Shane about this and planned to ask the Special Investigations Unit for help, but Marlowe lost contact with Tony after that. When Marlowe found Tony's fingerprints on a file about missile shipments, she thought he might still be alive and held captive by Shane to take the blame. Marlowe also stressed that she wasn't involved with Shane and only did things to protect herself and her daughter. After Marlowe confessed, Jack asked her to trick Shane into meeting her so they could catch him. Shane was with an engineer who knew about Little Wing technology. Soon after, Marlowe called Shane and said she was hiding out of town to avoid Tony's friends. Shane agreed to pick her up. Jack then gave Russo the job of taking care of Jenny while he left the city before Shane's men could come after him. When everything was ready, Marlowe waited for Shane at a spot while staying in touch with Jack's team. Meanwhile, Shane's men followed Russo and attacked his car. Russo urgently asked Jack for help, who was getting ready to catch Shane. While Shane realized Marlowe's call was a trap, he decided not to pick her up. At that time, Jack told the others to follow Russo, who who was in trouble. When Shane and his men got out of their car, Jack fought them until they were defeated. He then searched for Shane, but a helicopter arrived and shot Jack, allowing Shane to escape. Meanwhile, Russo bravely faced Shane's men alone, protecting Jenny. Even with Francis and Carla's help, Russo, who was shot, couldn't be saved in the end. After the incident, Jack decided to keep Marlo and Jenny safe in Buffalo, a place unrelated to him, to ensure their safety. Carla and David quickly organized Marlo and Jenny's departure. Meanwhile, Jack and Francis met with Drew to gather more information about Shane's plan. In the past, when Jack led the 110th Special Investigations Unit, he told his team about his plan to ambush a drug smuggling operation involving members of the American Army. Unfortunately, their plan could ruin their careers because their bosses strictly forbade any ambushes, especially since Jack would be doing it without permission. Jack gave his team the choice to leave if they didn't want to be part of it, but they all chose to stick with him. That night, Jack and his team went to an old military base. At first, he felt frustrated because they couldn't find any evidence, but then they discovered illegal drugs hidden in a military vehicle's tires. Soon after, they got into a shootout with people trying to buy the drugs. They won and exposed the crimes of some military members. However, because they didn't have permission for the arrest, Jack was fired, and the 110th Special Investigations Unit was disbanded. Back in the present, Jack and Francis arrived at Drew's house just as he was preparing to flee with a bag of money from Shane. Drew was surprised to see them, especially when Jack confronted him with a gun. Jack asked about Shane's men who killed Russo, but Drew claimed he didn't expect Shane to go that far. He insisted Shane only wanted information about Jack. Drew admitted he didn't know where Shane would do the 650 sales. He suggested Jack meet Grant, who was in the hospital after Francis hit him for attacking Jenny earlier. When Jack was about to leave, Drew grabbed his gun. Because of that, Jack shot Drew in self-defense. Meanwhile, David and Carla escorted Marlo and Jenny safely to Buffalo. At the hospital, Jack and Francis disguised themselves as nurses to get into Grant's room, which was guarded by the police. Grant was the attacker under police watch. Jack threatened Grant to talk about Shane, and when he refused, Jack choked him. Cornered, Grant finally confessed that Shane would meet the missile buyer the next morning, but he didn't know where. Upon hearing that, Jack let him go but secretly injected poison into his foretube as payback for Russo's death. In the end, Grant soon convulsed and died. As Jack and Francis left Grant's room, they spotted someone disguised as a nurse sent by Shane, about to kill Grant. They chased him down. Francis fought him in the operating room, and just as he was about to harm her, Jack stepped in and finished him off. Soon after, using one of Shane's subordinates' phones, Jack called Shane to say his men had failed the mission. But Shane surprised Jack by revealing he had captured Carla and David. Shane demanded Jack and Francis meet him at a certain building. However, Jack, with a plan in mind, lied to Shane that Francis had died in the attack. This made Shane agree to meet Jack alone. After the call, Jack contacted Lavoie and explained his plan to take down Shane, asking the senator for assistance. That night, AM finished preparing 650 land missiles. He was supposed to deliver them to the meeting place with Shane. At the same time, Jack and Francis were near Shane's headquarters. Francis was worried about Jack's safety because he planned to sneak into the building. She was especially concerned because Shane's men were holding Carla and David hostage. Despite the risks, Jack was determined to rescue his friends. Inside the building, Jack met Shane and checked on Carla and David, who were tied up. Shane, angry after learning Francis was alive, interrogated Jack about her whereabouts. But Jack didn't give in, even when Shane got violent. Meanwhile, Francis was outside, trying to distract Shane's guards. She also contacted Lavoie to confirm help from the senator. Inside the building, Shane, desperate to make Jack talk, revealed his evil plan. He blamed Tony for the Little Wing Project, a plan that caused harm to many people. Shane showed Jack Tony's body parts, claiming Tony was behind it all. Soon after, Shane ordered his men to take Carla and David to a helicopter to execute them, just like he did to Calvin. Meanwhile, Jack secretly freed himself from handcuffs and fought Shane's men. At the same time, Lavoie's help secretly arrived at the building. Francis caught a corrupt policeman as he left the building and immobilized him. She also managed to immobilize the helicopter pilot who was about to harm her friends. As Shane's men were taken down, Shane tried to escape in a helicopter with David and Carla, intending to drop them into the forest. Unexpectedly, Jack caught up and hung onto the helicopter. He snuck inside and rescued his friends. Shane and his men were surprised by Jack's attack. Besides fighting Shane and his men, Jack also had to save Carla, who almost fell from the helicopter. Luckily, she freed herself and joined the fight against the criminals. When Shane found himself trapped, he pleaded with Jack not to kill him. He promised to reveal the meeting place with AM, but Jack ignored him and threw Shane from a height. Then, Jack and his friends forced the pilot to take them to a house near the forest where AM was meeting an engineer to install the little wing chip on the missile. Soon after, AM arrived at the engineer's house and was shocked to see Jack's team killing his men. With Jack pointing a gun at him, AM admitted he was only buying missiles with little wing technology. Before AM could say more, Jack and his friends shot him dead and took his suitcase filled with $65 million. Shortly after, Jack and his team questioned the helicopter pilot and the engineer. They both claimed they had no knowledge of the Little Wing project. Jack let them go, but as they boarded the helicopter, Francis accidentally triggered a Little Wing missile, causing it to explode. At the same time, Lavoie's troops arrived, but instead of helping, they were ordered by the senator to eliminate Jack and his friends. However, Jack had secretly asked for help from the Ministry of Home Affairs troops to arrest Lavoie's men. Meanwhile, Lavoie was arrested in his office due to his involvement with the Little Wing project, which the senator was also connected to. In the end, Jack and his friends gave the $65 million to the families of Shane's victims. With Shane defeated, Jack decided to travel and explore different places with his friends. So the moral of the story is, always double-check your locksmith before burning your passport in an airport bathroom. It might save you from identity theft and a whole lot of trouble with secret agents and angry police officers.